Hi guys, welcome to Pixel Affair. It's Kobe here, and in today's video we are going to see how we recreate this particular video here. So this video was actually a question I got from Instagram, right, about how I'll do something like this particular artwork up here using Cinema 4D cloner, right? You can see the clones, and it was asking how I'll do something like this with a clone. So I decided to actually check it out, right? And this, let me actually show. The original video was actually done by Sikani Solomon, and it's for an app called Cash App, right? And I've actually seen this before, which is very fascinating, how like they all form together, and I was wondering how to do it. So I got this question and I decided to actually play around with Cinema to see how I'll be able to do something like this. So let's get into Cinema 4D and see how we do that. And actually, before I go ahead, this was not literally, was not done using the cloner object, because I'm not sure. I don't know how originally it was done though, but I couldn't find any way to do it using the cloner object. But then I found a way, and there are a couple of ways to do it. But there's another way we can actually do it, like sort of a little bit procedural. And you can see in here, I used it to do the same thing with a text, right? You can use it on any object as well. And it's procedural. I can actually go in and change the text and everything if I want. So let's actually get into Cinema 4D and see how it will do that. So I'm in Cinema 4D and I'm using Cinema 4D R26, right? But I'm sure this could be done in almost every Cinema 4D version that you use. So let's actually get in and start creating our object. Like I said, this actually wasn't done using clone object. Initially, I actually didn't see any way you could use clone object to do an irregular object and make them fit together like that. So I realized it's something which was pre-made, right? And actually, so let's actually see how we will make it. So I'll come into my object and I'll create a plane, right? And I'll change the axis to ZY, and I'll make the width like say 50, and I'll make the height like 1000, right? Now let's change the display to garage shading with lines, and let's also effect. I don't like the work plane, so I'll uncheck it. So we have 10 segments on the width. Let's make it just 5, and let's make the height segment 100, right? So that we get evenly squared segmented plane, right? So like I said, there are a couple of ways you can actually do this. So the first way will probably be and that's not how we are going to do it, but let me show. I'll disable this and I'll make this one editable. Will probably be you actually manually going in to create the parts that you want. So for instance, I'll make this editable. I'll come to polygon mode, and now I can change this one, choose this particular selection to live selection to, and now you can go in and individually select the parts that you want and everything, right? Maybe if you want this, like individually do them like that, like depending on how, like, so you can actually take time if you really have some particular way you want it. And the advantage for this is that it gives you total control on exactly how you want your things to look and how you want them to be placed, right? Then you can later then go ahead and split it and all of that. But this is not how we will do it, right? Then we are going to do it in a different way, because we don't want to do the hard work, but that one also work. And like, let's actually go ahead and do that. So that's the way we are going to do it. There probably could be another way, which maybe I've not really explored, but I'm actually thinking about it, that you can actually blend the two, the proceduralism plus a little bit of manual work, and you can get exactly how you want your these things to look, your shapes to look at the same time. It's a bit procedural, but like we'll talk about that one later. I'll actually play with it and see how I'll do that, or that can be done. But let's go ahead and see how we did it. The video I showed earlier. So I'll delete this and I'll bring back my plane, right? And what we are going to use is an old forgotten Cinema 4D deformer, right? It's a very powerful deformer. It used to be the useful in those days, but now, like, because of new technology and new stuff, it's not useful again. And that's in the deformers. If you come in the deformers, in here we have a deformer called explosion effects, right? If I choose the explosion effects and make it a child of our plane, you can see it brings them trying to explode them, but into segments, right, into these chunks. So what we do is that I'll select the explosion effect. I'll make it very huge. Make sure everything, all the red part covers like our plane, right? Everything covers it. And I'll actually select the explosion effects and now come into the tab. I'll first of all come into the object tab and make sure the time is set to like 100%. I'll come into gravity and set gravity to 0, right? And I'll come into explosion and I'll set explosion for now. Let's set it to 1 to see what's going on. And yeah, the blast range, let's actually even make the blast range like 1000 because we want to make sure it's completely covering our object, right? And now this is what the explosion. So now you can see it's broken our plane into small chunks and stuff like that. Now what the explosion effects helps us with, if we come to the cluster tab, first of all, you can see it's giving our object some thickness, so we can control the thickness. Let's set this particular thickness to like say 12.5, right? And now you can see we have this thickness. If you don't want, you can also make it 0, right? But we want it at the 12.5. So 12.5, and then the down here you can see the poly, minimum poly and maximum poly. So this is where we use to define the kind of polygons we want. So we can come in here and set it to like say the minimum poly should be 1 polygon and the maximum poly, like chunk of polygons, should be 4, right? So now it's going to try as much as possible to make them either the polygon is 1, 2, 3 or 4. It'll never be more than 4 most of the time. So that's what it's going to create. So if I actually, let me come into the explosion and increase a bit, you can see we have 3 here, 2, and it breaks them into different shapes, right? So some of the 3, like it looks different, all of that, and that's really interesting. So that's what I actually used. But the downside with this is that you don't really have control for the randomness, or you can't have like a little bit of control. Say if you want more of the, let's say the ones that are in 4 or the 3s or something, it's just does it for you and you don't have control. That's if it's done, it's done. You can't actually change the seed or anything, right? So that's basically how I use the explosion effects. But I can actually come in here and also have other controls. So if you set it to polygon modes, all of them will be just polygons and it wouldn't respect. I mean, you see this one has been grayed out, but let's set it back to automatic, or you can actually use selection and things to do that. But let's go back to our automatic. So this is what I used, right? And because you don't have control, so what I did was that, okay, let me first show everything before I'll go to the full explain the whole process again. So now I'll select the explosion effects and then I'll come to the explosion tab and I'll make sure the strength is set to like say 0.1. Let's see, you can see still we see them breaking out. So let's actually make it even smaller, 0.001. And everything is closed, but still I think there should be a little bit of explosion in it. So for us to see if our object has been exploded, let's go ahead and hide the explosion. We don't want to see it. We have to put it in either we can put it in the fracture objects, or what I prefer in this case is the Voronoi fracture. So I'll put my plane in the Voronoi fracture and I can see the Voronoi fracture is also fracturing it. But if you come into the Voronoi fracture, come to the source and delete the point generator, now it's now recognizing all the chunks or the breaks that the explosion effects actually did. So now with the Voronoi fracture selected, if I come into my effect test and I choose random, you can see now it randomizes it, right? I'll go ahead and delete the random, or if I put it into, let me create a polygon subsurface deformer and make it a subsurface how do you call it, subdivision surface, I mean, and make the Voronoi child of it. You can see now we've basically created our shapes that we want. So that's basically how I actually created those shapes, right? So now that we've created those shapes, how did I do the rest? So let me actually disable this. And now, so because like I said, you don't necessarily have control over the number of the chunks, how you want them to be. What I actually did was, so I created multiple copies of the plane. So this one, right? I'll select the explosion effect, come to the cluster, and I set this one to, like, say, just chunks of 3 and 4, right? And now if I enable the Voronoi, you can see it tries as much as possible to make them 3 and 4s, right? And you can actually use it to create some sort of Tetris, video game or kind of thing, right? But yeah, it create 3s and 4s, and then I duplicated it, right? Create another copy, and I'll say this one, I want chunks of, let's say, 2 and 1, 2 and 1 actually, so 1 and 2s, right? And I'll move, like, remember we made the cluster thickness 12.5, right? So let's move this plane back 12.5, 12.5, right? And now we've created another version of it, right? So I did it 4 times, so I created another one, and I'll say maybe this one I want chunks of 3 and 2, right? Then I'll move this one to back, maybe to 25, right? And I'll create a 4th one, and I'll change it to, let's actually move it to 37.5, right? So this one will be the 4th one, and that one we can actually come in here, and I'll say let's blend it from now 1 to 4, right? So now that's basically our object created. So now if we enable our subdivision surface, you can see it breaks our object into this. Let's take off the garage shading. So now we have our shape. So that's basically the whole idea behind how I did this. Now the rest was to go ahead. So let me actually come into my object. I'll create a circle spline, and then I'll put my let me actually, the Voronoi fracture in here. In the null object, I'll create a null object, and I'll put the Voronoi fracture in the null object, right? And I'll create a deformer, spline wrap deformer, make it a child of the null object, right? And in the spline wrap, we come into our object tab, and the object, the spline we want to wrap our object around is this particular circle. So I'll drag this circle into the spline wrap here, right? Let's change the axis from X to, I think, Z or Y. Yeah, actually Y, right? And now you can see it's wrapping around our spline. Then now we can put the spline wrap null rather into a subdivision surface, and let me enable it. And now you can see we have our shape. So that's basically the whole idea behind it. So from here going, you can actually use the, let me select the Voronoi fracture, come into here, and I'll create a, let's say, a random effector, and you can see it's randomizing it. I can come select the random effector, come into the fields, and I'll choose a linear field, and I'll change it to -y. I think Y should be fine, and let's see how everything looks, right? Now if I come in here, and let me increase the randomness in the parameter to like 150 by 150 by 150, like, right? Now you can see the randomness is coming in. We can also use, let's say, select the Voronoi fracture, come in here, and I'll create a plane as well. And the plane, I'll use the same linear field. So I'll select the plane, come to its field, and I'll use the same linear field in here. And now you see the plane. You can actually, even in the plane, come to the scale, and now let's probably make it even smaller. Like, basically you can use the Mograph object and everything on it. So right, if I select and move it up like that, right, it's affecting it. But the downside to this is that all these things happens before the spline wrap, so you can see a little bit of pinching and everything in here. So if you move it, push it too much, it will be obvious and it wouldn't be cool. So what I actually went ahead and did is that I'll go in here. Let me also hide the spline wrap. I don't want to see the spline wrap in the scene, right? I'll disable the effectors and everything, and now I'll disable the subdivision surface as well. So now that we've wrapped it around our sphere, our spline, I think it's not wrapping. So I'll select the spline, and I'll come into the radius and I'll reduce it a little bit. Oh, actually, I think it works. The 200 is fine, right? And I'll come into, before, like, let me actually twist it. So we select the spline wrap, come into its object tab, and down here you can see we have rotation. I'll open the rotation and I'll twist it a little bit. So to something like here, right? If you double click on this point, you can type in the exact where we want our point to be. So I'll set 0.75, and now let's actually, in fact, let me make it linear. So I'll come into my spline preset and I'll make it linear, and I'll double click on this and I'll set it to 0.75. But you can actually make it 1 however you want it, but I did 0.75 in my initial video. So now, like, we have it twisted and everything, right? And then I'll come in here, or is it, I'll put this whole thing right back into another Voronoi fracture. So I'll show the reason why. So I'll come into my Mograph menu and I'll create another Voronoi fracture, make the null a child of the Voronoi fracture, right? And it should go ahead and try to work it. So now with this new Voronoi fracture, that's where I'll actually apply my randomness and everything. So I'll come into the old Voronoi fracture and come to its effectors, and I'll delete these effectors that I applied earlier, right? So with this new Voronoi fracture, I'll come in, let me see. So this new Voronoi fracture, we make sure in the source tab there's no point in here, so we delete the source point, and then in the effector tab we will drag in our random, and let's drag in our plane as well if you want, and let's enable them to see how it looks. So you can see in here, if I select the linear field and move it right the way it moves it, let's change the field to say X or plus X, like that, right? So this is how it looks after putting them into another Voronoi fracture and making sure we delete the source as well. So now I can put this Voronoi fracture rather in the subdivision surface, right? And now if I enable it, you can see this is exactly the same way I actually did it. So the rest was just a camera movement. Come back and it goes in, and now everything, you can animate it however you want, right? Using fields, you can use the radial field to let it grow on however you want it, basically. So after this is done, the rest was to add our materials and everything, right? So I'll actually go ahead and show how I added the materials to get the random colors and everything. But to do it on a text tool is the same thing. So let me quickly create a scene here, and I'll create a text object. I'll make it, maybe I'll come into the object and I'll make it say any text. Let's type in P, right? I'll make sure align to the middle, and then I'll set the text depth to 0, right? Now if you go to bring our display and change the garage shading, like you can see the text doesn't have enough segments. And one thing the poly effects, where is it, the explosion effects does is that it needs the object polys to create the chunks. So if I make the explosion effect a child of the text, see what's happening now. If I select the explosion effects and come to the gravity, let's set it to 0 once again. Explosion, let's bring it down a bit, and this one is based on the spline breakage of our text, which is not visible right now. So for us to get the chunks we want, I wouldn't put it directly under the text. What I'll do is that I'll come into, let's actually select the text and make it a little bit bold, all right? And I'll come into my Cinema 4D object tabs, in here object, and I'll create a remesher, make the text a child of the remesher, right? So that now it breaks it down into quads, right? So we can now set it to quads and now increase the amount we want, like say 500, and in this case I think it's fine. And now I'll put the remesher and the explosion in a null object. So I'll create a null object, put the remesher and the explosion effects and make it a child. And now if you come into the explosion, and increase the strength, you can see it's broken into chunks. So the cluster, I can come into the cluster and make it say 4, or however I want it, 1 and 4. All right. And now if we go back to the explosion, let's increase the time, how do you call it, the time here, and in the explosion, let's set it to 0.001, right? And like we did, you can simply put this one straight into like a subdivision surface, and now you can see we have our text broken down into smaller chunks. If you want to use Mograph to affect it, then you have to put it into another how do you call it, either the Voronoi fracture or the fracture object, so that you can separate them as individuals. So that's basically how you use it to work on your text as well. Now let's go back and see how you actually add materials and to get the random colors that we did in the original video. So now we are going to add material to it, but before, let me actually say one thing. So for instance, if you don't like how, or if you want to make the edges a bit tighter, you can simply add how do you call it, a bevel deformer to your object, right? So I can, with the spline wrap, after I can come in here and I'll create a bevel deformer, and I'll make it after the spline wrap, the bevel deformer comes, and now that should add bevel to our object, and you can see it's now a little bit, if I disable the random and all of those things, you can see now the edges are a bit sharper, and it's, if this is how you want it, you can actually use the bevel deformer to give it a little bit of edge so that it looks sharper and all of that, right? But I'll disable the bevel deformer for now, and let's actually go in and see how we will add our material. So with the materials, what I used is I used Redshift. So I'll hide this effect there, and I'll come in here and I'll create my Redshift materials. I'll come into my materials, I'll come into create Redshift, and I'll create my Redshift material, right? And now also for us to see what's happening, we will need the Redshift render view. So I'll come into my Redshift render view, all right, and then I think it will show on my other monitor. So where is it? So yeah, this is our Redshift render view. Let's put it somewhere here. So I'll dock it somewhere here. So we have our Redshift render view, and if you hit render, this is all we have. Let's apply our material to our Redshift Voronoi fracture, right? And now let's actually start seeing. Let me quickly create a dome light. So I'll come into my, and I'll create a dome light. I'll look for an HDRI image and I'll apply it to it. So I've actually gone ahead and I've applied an HDRI image to it here, but I think the HDRI has a little bit of color in it, so you can see it's tinting our shader, like it's giving it that bluish color. So first of all, I'll come into the Redshift and set the saturation to 0, so there's no color in it. And then I also don't like the background of our dome light, so I'll uncheck background as well, so it's just our object in here. So now let's get into our material shader and see how you actually get those random colors. So I'll double click on our material to open the Redshift shader graph, which is open on my other monitor. I'll bring it in, and now I'll come into my colors in here. I'll search for color user data, but if you type in user data, you can see it brings in everything that has the name user data. And now the one I want is the color user data. I'll drag and drop it in here, all right, and the color user data, I'll actually select it, so I'll select this knot, pipe it in here, and I'll connect it to the diffuse color of our material, right? Now you can see everything turns black, right? Then I'll go into the attribute name here. I'll click on this small rectangle here, and I'll come to object, geometry ID color, and I'll choose the geometry ID color, and I can see straight away it's giving us this random colors, right? So that's basically it. Now to have control over the exact colors we want to use the ramp, so I'll come in here and I'll type in, I'll look for ramp, right, and I'll drag and drop in the ramp. So instead of connecting our color user data straight to the diffuse color, we'll connect it to the ramp first input, and now we connect the ramp back into the color diffuse color, and I can see it makes it this grayscale color, which is black and white. So now to get the exact colors we want, you can come in here, select the ramp, and make sure the attribute of the ramp is open here. And now I'll select this one. I'll make it something like this, maybe around this bluish purplish here. Yeah, so from here going, I'll select this one and I'll make it a little bit like bluish but light, something like that. I'll create another one and I'll make this one maybe a bit more darker. All right, and maybe I'll create another one here. I want it to hide somewhere here. I want a bit more of this. So like you play around with your colors to eventually think you have something that you want, right? So that's basically how I got the random colors and stuff. So you can use any color and everything that you want. So that's basically how I got the colors. The rest, the phone thing was just a cube, which I looked for a screen on Google and I just placed it in front. So it's not like actually anything, right? And that's basically all I did. Now, yeah, one thing I actually did was that you can actually add a thin film color to it, but in my case, I actually didn't use a thin film. I use Fresnel. So if I come in here and I search for Fresnel, drag it and drop it in here, right? We can actually how do you call it? Drag in our Fresnel straight to our object. Let's see what the Fresnel is doing. I don't know if it's Fresnel or Fresnel. So I'll copy it straight, I'll drag and drop it straight to the surface to see what the Fresnel is doing. So you can see it gives us this black and white shading thing. Let's get closer. Right? Gives us, the edges are white and it's fading back to black. Let's select the Fresnel and make sure we checked this use index whatever index of refraction. Let's uncheck it, and now let's set the curve fall off to like 1, right? And you can see now this is how it looks. That's how I actually did. So instead of using the Fresnel straight, we'll use another ramp. So I'll come into my in here, I'll look for ramp again, drag and drop in the ramp, right? And with this ramp, I'll connect the Fresnel to this ramp, the input, and I'll connect the ramp back into this object. You just want to see how our Fresnel look before we apply it to our general material, right? And if I pass it through the ramp, nothing really changes though, right? So I'll select the ramp, and now we'll use the ramp to change the color. So I'll come to the ramp attributes. Let me actually bring it up, and in here we have ramp preset or gradient preset. So I'll load presets here. You can see you have all these presets, and I'll choose the full color. Full colors. That's double click on it to open it, and I can see now our Fresnel has this gradientish look and everything. There's actually a thin film shader in Redshift which you can use, but this is what I basically use though. So I'll bring back our material, right? And now the Fresnel, how do we connect it? Right, we will connect it to, if I come in here to our material, I can see we have coating, right? And here coating, and the coating, what basically does is that it gives us extra reflection on top of our material and everything. So we are going to pipe the Fresnel on that coating, right? So I'll increase the coating weight to 1, and now if I connect it's the ramp here, come down here to coating, and now choose coating color here, right? It's not visible enough, so let's actually increase the coating to like probably, let's say 10. And actually no, not the coating, I mean the IOR here. So let's increase the IOR to a lot. You can see it's beginning to show in here. Let me actually get close to this one rather. You can see if you increase the IR, you can see now there's a little bit of the rainbowish color showing through. So if you want it to show even more visible, you can increase the IR to like 10, and now you can see it's showing even more. So that's basically all I did with regards to the material and lighting and everything. It wasn't anything. I just used one dome light and I added this extra stuff to get it. So basically this is everything that I did. I'll actually show, I'm actually thinking of a new way you can also do this with, like I said, a little bit of proceduralism and a little bit of manual control, but I'll play around with it to see what you can come up with. If it actually works and it's intuitive as well, then I'll actually do a video on it. But I have other more interesting stuff that I'm actually trying to figure out. So next year actually going to be an exciting one. Thank you for watching, and I hope this video was useful and you've learned something from this particular video. I'll see you in the next one. If you have any question or anything, you can actually ask in the comment section or send me a DM in my Instagram and I'll check it out. And if I can do something about it, I'll actually go ahead and do that. Thank you for watching once again. Kindly subscribe to the channel if you've not, liked this video, and if you can share it as well. Thank you once again. See you in the next one.